Hello, world singers. My name is Brooke,
And I'm Tyler.
and this is
Cosmere
Cosmere Conversations.
Hello, everyone. It is fantastic to be with you again as the summer months begin to wane here on Cosmere Conversations in 2025, because we never know when you are picking it up. It has been a incredible set of episodes that we've had, and we have a lot more in store for you. But we wanted to give a quick shout out to our summer patrons, people who joined up recently. Thank you so much. Brooke, could you help me out with this?
Welcome to the Patreon, Dustin B, Pop the Stack, Antonio L, John R, and Derek.
Always fantastic to have more people over on the Patreon. You get access to the Discord server where all the greatest conversations happen, and you get exclusive early access to episodes as well, including one with a very special guest coming up in September. I hope you all are excited, but this will be the last time that we make a direct plea for those ratings and reviews, 5 stars only, of course, but go out, rate us. It's very easy to do. And why else should you rate us with 5 stars? I think because there are no ads on this podcast. What do you get? You get conversations, and that's
That is true. No ads is pretty great. I recently listened to another fantasy podcast, and man, the podcast was good, but they had so many ads. It was definitely a detraction to my enjoyment of the podcast, and I thought, wow, we are pretty cool for not having any ads in our podcast. We hope you enjoy the podcast, and if you do, please rate and review on the podcast platform of your choice.
Yeah, thank you so much. Obviously, the most important reason why you should rate us and review us is because it's our birthday season, and you should celebrate our birthday.
My birthday season, particularly.
Exactly. So go out there, rate us, and we are going to then take a break from the constant asking for ratings and reviews. Because not only do we not have advertising, we don't hit you over the head with asking for rating and reviews all the time. But whenever you happen to get this, whether it's the first day it drops, whether it's in a year, whether it's in 10 years, you know I'm going to host this server forever. I hope that you take a chance to rate and review us.
Back to our regular scheduled programming. We have kind of concluded our first little mini series in our Wind and Truth mega series, and we're going to move on to start talking about the interludes, because there are so many fascinating tidbits, interesting character moments, things that are capitalizing on storylines from past books, as well as, I think, setting things up for the back half of the Stormlight Archive, all contained in these interludes. I personally have been absolutely dying to talk about a couple of these since Wind and Truth came out, and I'm really excited to start diving in. Today, we're starting with Kalak, L, and my favorite, Baxil.
It's going to be a pretty dense series of episodes because we actually have more interludes than we normally do in Stormlight Archive books, as the 5th book, Wind and Truth, had 10 parts, or the 10 days. There were actually interludes between all those days, which is more than we normally get, which means we have more content to talk about. And these 3 specific interludes are going to serve as a great jumping off point. Do you want to just dive right in and perhaps color ourselves with some information about Kalak and Felt?
Yes. In my opinion, one of the most interesting or shocking moments in the Kalak interlude is about Felt, because in this interlude, it's rather short. It's maybe the first interlude, but we see Kalak going back to his room in lasting integrity. This is just after Adolin and Shallan have gone back to the physical realm. Kalak's making his way back to his little spot, and Felt is waiting for him super creepily, sort of in the dark, sitting in a chair, waiting for him with this menacing gemstone dagger, which of course is the same weapon or the same type of weapon that killed Yezrian. We quickly find out that Allah, the Sion that Shallan quote unquote rescued from the little communication device that Mraize had given her, is secretly evil and was faking being traumatized the entire time.
This is, I know Felt was the actual big reveal. Another world hopper, someone we'd seen before, was hiding
I had
in.
such good vibes about Felt. Like all the time I was like, "Oh man, Felt, this like cool world hopper. He seems great. Love him. Love like catching little glimpses of him here and there." I felt so betrayed.
But the bigger betrayal in my mind is with Allah the Sion, because Shallan is traumatizing herself all throughout Rhythm of War. Now, to be fair, Shallan's often traumatizing herself. That's kind of her thing. However, Allah is making that worse because Allah is the spy that Shallan is looking for. And we get this reveal from Shallan. She's like, I'm the spy. I'm the one. And like Radiant has betrayed me. Myself has betrayed me. All of that stuff is true to her. It is important for her character development. There's lots of different aspects going on, but the actual spy is Allah.
Well, it's a little bit of both. There are certain activities that Shallan did do as the
Yes.
spy, but there are other things that are not accounted for by the explanation of Shallan being the spy, and that's because Allah is doing all the other stuff and was faking being traumatized, which is just rude. Don't do that.
So we have Felt and Allah working together. Allah, a Sion, obviously from the planet Cell. So not only is he a world hopper, but he's a world hopper who has enough familiarity with the blending of different magic systems and cultures.
And he seems to be part of the Ghost Bloods. Allah says that she has relayed the location of Mishram to Ayatel and Kelsier. And then Felt says that he doesn't work for Ayatel and he calls her, quote, that masked witch. And then he also refers to Kelsier as Kelsier, notably not Thydakar, which is what we most often hear him referred to as, especially by the Ghost Bloods. I found this very interesting. I don't quite know what this says about Felt. He's obviously connected to the Ghost Bloods in some way, but is seemingly not part of Ayatel's faction. Is he part of a different faction? Is he sort of a rogue agent or just a lone agent? When did he meet Kelsier is my
Right.
question, and like why he would know him by that name.
I think that it has to do with age because
Yeah.
not only is, Felt revealing himself in this moment, but Felt had a long history with Dalinar, going
Yes.
back into his military service all the way back before the events of Stormlight Archive.
Well, and I guess don't we also see Felt in Mistborn Era 1?
Right.
Is
And
that
so
right?
I am thinking that Felt had met Kelsier in Era 1 before he had adopted the Thydakar mindset or whatever,
Yeah.
and had not like fully transitioned. And so for Felt to name Kelsier Thydakar would be like a weird acknowledgement that Kelsier changed his name. His name is Kelsier. I met him as Kelsier. He's a guy who
Yeah.
happened to die and be a
Right.
cognitive shadow, but like so is Vasher, so whatever. It would be stranger for him to use the almost title of Thydakar, leader of the Ghost
Mm.
Bloods,
Mhm.
because he didn't meet him as Thydakar,
Yeah.
leader of the Ghost Bloods.
Yeah.
That's my guess. Feel free to throw us out all the different sightings of Felt and if you agree or disagree about the naming of Kelsier versus Thydakar.
Felt and Allah decide to hold Kalak hostage as they wait to hear how this mission to find Mishram goes. And that's where we leave them. We kind of hear, okay, we're not going to kill you immediately, but we're going to creepily hold you here until we find out how things go. I mean, it seems that Kalak does not get killed by Felt since he shows up at the end to once again be a herald. But I do think that like, I wonder what the conversation was after the everything with Mishram goes down, or if maybe that information just doesn't get to Felt in time before Kalak can just like zap away and go be a herald again.
Yeah, I do think that if he was being in prison, there is a zapping away possibility that he was just like sitting with Felt, being held hostage, and then was like, "Hey, man, got a job to do.
Time
Peace,"
to go.
and just evaporated into the air or into the stone. Maybe they go down
Oh,
into Rashar, shift over, and
oh
then
my
pop up.
gosh.
Stone wards can do it. Why wouldn't just all the heralds be able to do it? I don't know. That's more
That's
speculation off
very
the top of my
silly.
head. Of
That
course
doesn't
it is.
make any sense.
That's what you're here for, people. Another reason to rate and review is the silliness. But I do think it's a good question. Did Felt get what he wanted out of the mission to find Mishram? Because
I mean, I
Mishram
would say
is
no,
why? Tell me more.
because Ayatil fails at getting
But he
Mishram.
doesn't work for Ayatel. And that's kind of like what I'm wondering is what actually is his
But he
motivation?
seems to be piggybacking on that because the Sion relays the location of Mishram to Ayatil.
And I'm not saying
So,
I am not saying that he isn't perfectly aligned, maybe just in this moment, though he's not directly working for, but maybe he's piggybacking because they are the closest, best group to get him further to his goals,
yeah,
but we don't
exactly.
know his
My
goals.
guess would be he's hoping that Ayatil will get Mishram and he's gonna like steal Mishram from Ayatil or something.
Fun possibilities, but it's left hanging. We don't know what happens to Feld. I would expect to see more of him in the back
Maybe
half
in Ghost Bloods.
or in Ghostblood. So we could
Yeah.
actually get Felt before we see the characters from
Yeah.
Rashar again.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to our next interlude. This is about Elle,
This is the big one.
an endlessly fascinating character that we really don't know anything about,
Do
who
you
will
remember?
definitely be in the back half.
Yeah, we speculated so hard about L at Rhythm of War and
I
the
mean,
transition to Wind and Truth. We were just like,
yeah,
who is L? He wrote his poem. It is creepy. What's going
he's
on?
so weird. He's so weird. I don't know what's happening with him.
And yet, is he the best of all of them? Is he the only one who's right?
No.
Let's go through the interlude because there is a bunch of new information that we get.
Yeah, we get more info in this interlude. It's one of the longer ones. Essentially, we pick up with El, and he is going into the Kolinar Palace vault, and his mission is to dispatch what is left of Yezrian. I was very surprised to read this. I think we talked a little bit about this maybe in our first Wind and Truth episode. I was like, wait, what? I thought Yezrian was like fully dead. Why is there some of him left? Like, what does this mean? And we'll get to that in just a moment. But Elle has some interactions with some of the guards there who are singers and former Parshendi. They're new to using the rhythms, of
Hmm.
course, once they've reawakened essentially in the Everstorm. They're suddenly able to hear the rhythms that they were cut off from while they were Parshmen.
I found his reaction at this time to be of note. He says, quote, he stoked his annoyance, cherished it as all emotions should be, end quote.
And he's annoyed because he comments several times about these new singers being confused about the rhythms, basically, and not really knowing which ones to use in which context. So they keep using rhythms that are weird.
Hmm. Yeah, the juxtaposition is wrong, or it feels wrong to him. He remarks that the current fuse are refusing to be proper role models. And this
Yeah.
is why I started with maybe he's the one who's right. He is pointing out all of the problems, noticing all of the problems. The fused are bad role models. They are doing a disservice to the listener population, not teaching them correctly. When the whole point of the fused is to be protecting the listeners and to be like helping them,
I
stave
mean,
off the
maybe
humans
at one
at one
point.
point in the very far past.
Yeah.
But like it seems like he's still motivated by that. But then we run into the exact same problem that I have with all cognitive shadows, but is on display with the heralds as well. Remember, heralds and fused can be thought of as two sides of the same coin. L says this, quote, my kind wear thin, like shoes walked upon for too many miles, end quote. His soul is wearing thin. We see this with Rabaniel and her daughter, the madness that comes upon the fuse, but also the madness with the heralds. Vasher has this, rock that he is saying like has worn down over time. He's a worn fossil. And then we could even jump over to Lord of the Rings when Frodo describes his soul, like after having the
Mm.
ring for so long, as like butter spread over too much bread. And it's just like a thin veneer of what he should be or what he feels like he should be. And that's what I'm getting from L as well.
And as you said, he has a unique perspective. He says, quote, "My honor was stripped in part because I warned of the signs. We cannot rule much longer." End quote.
He's a truth teller.
I mean, the question is always, because I think we saw this a little bit with Rabaniel too, a fuse that seemed much more sane and had more presence of mind than a lot of the fused, but she was kind of crazy in her own way, you know?
Definitely,
Like, I don't
definitely.
know if she was actually any better off. She was just sort of better at dealing with it. And so there's part of me that wants to say, oh, is Elle the most sane of the fused for whatever reason? And then there's part of me that cautions against that and is like, maybe he's equally crazy. He's just better at hiding it.
Certainly, I think that might be the case. And I remember the pursuer as well during Rhythm of War, who is obsessed with his singular task. And then when he's not able to perform that singular task because of Kaladin and because of the nine that holds him back at times, that's when he begins to fray even more. It's because he becomes disaligned,
Mm.
where Rabaniel and to a better degree, Leshwi, they are able to stay aligned
Oh yeah,
to their,
Leshwi seems pretty with it.
and I think that's because she's the most aligned as like the honor spren version of Fused. All she has to do is be honorable, and like that keeps her a little bit more sane.
I think to
L,
your point, just sort of like having a purpose,
yes,
a really well-defined purpose that they care about, maybe helps them hold on. And Elle certainly seems to have some specific motivations. We don't really know what they are, but he definitely seems to be someone who knows what he wants and knows what he believes very definitively.
and in this moment, what he wants and what he believes is right to do is to completely end and destroy Yesrian, or the remnants of Yesrian. He finds the Racium dagger that was used by Moash to kill Yesrian in the first place. He touches the tip of it to a gemstone of anti-stormlight, which brings in the anti-stormlight into the dagger. But within that dagger is the remnants of Yesrian. And so there's like an explosion, a very small, tiny explosion that happens within the gemstone. And Elle says it is, quote, barely enough to crack the gemstone, which indicates the last little bit of Yesrian was destroyed permanently in that moment.
And he says, quote, "There hadn't been much of Yezrian left. Now even that was gone forever. Goodbye, old friend," Elle whispered to No Rhythm. "That imprisonment," Elle said, tossing the dagger away, "is a punishment none deserve. We shame ourselves by trapping instead of destroying a herald." End quote.
Once again, seems to be doing the right thing. I can get behind these motivations. But probably most surprising is the phrase, my old friend.
Yes.
Elle and these ancient fused have some type of deep, intimate relationship with the heralds
Well, I
because
don't know if all of them do,
not necessarily all of
but
them, but they've all been around for so long and they all keep going back and forth because when the heralds go to Braze, they are interacting with the fused. The fuse are the one that are
oh.
pushing against them to get out. And
Yes, I think this is going back to before Fused even existed. Like, Elle was a singer on Rashar. There were many times in the history here when humans and singers were trying to negotiate, trying
right,
to solve their problems without war, and there were relationships there. My perspective is that Elle was probably a key person, a key negotiator trying to solve these issues in a more peaceful way. Of course, the heralds were the point people for the humans, and so he was interacting with them a lot. And while they may have had differences, he clearly saw them as friends and got to know them over their time trying to resolve their issues.
I think that's a really good call. And it may have even been a singer that we see in the not flashbacks, but the spiritual realm traveling of Dalinar. There are moments like when the humans first arrive and Dalinar is saying, like, there's singers up on the ridge, or later, we know that there, as you pointed out, there's like interactions between emissaries between
Yeah,
the
I mean, they're
singer.
living side by side.
Exactly. And so, like, at any point, one of those singers could have, unknown to us, been L, and it was just like mentioned as a, a single sentence.
There is a singer who shows up at one point whose name begins with L
Okay.
that I
Okay.
did kind of clock. I wish I had pulled that for this, but I didn't. It's not indicated in any way that that is the same person as L, but I just made a little note of it like, maybe that's the pre-fused L, because that person is like talking to the heralds in that part.
Now, what do you think is going on here with the remnants of Yesrian? Because Elle says, quote, "Yes, you were already nearly gone, weren't you, old friend? The prisons don't work on humans as well as thought." End quote.
I have no idea. I don't really understand how this is working. My understanding is that when Yezrian is stabbed, his soul, his cognitive shadow, I guess, is like pulled out of his body, and the sort of investiture, the oath pact that was keeping him alive as a cognitive shadow is broken. And therefore, that connection goes away. His soul goes to the beyond, and he is properly dead, which is why Shalash has the reaction that she does. And other heralds, I think we also see
Hmm.
react to this feeling of Yesbrian being truly dead, not going to Bray's dead, but dead, dead. And so I do feel like it undercuts that moment a little bit of thinking like, oh, in that moment, Yesrian is gone, to then getting this interlude where it's like, well, he is mostly gone, but something is lingering. What is that something? Why would a human be different? I guess, like, what is he comparing it to? The prisons don't work as well on humans.
Well, he could be
Compared
comparing
to a
it
spren? Or
comparing it
compared to a
to
fused?
Ba'edo Mishram is like the other thing we know was imprisoned in this way, as well as the thrill. Like those spren or unmade
Right.
creatures would be the other thing we know has been captured and imprisoned. So I would say
Yeah.
it doesn't work as well on humans because the prisons are quote unquote designed, maybe not really, but designed for spren like creatures rather
Yeah, like
than a
maybe
human.
there's something about just investiture
Right.
that can be trapped, but something like a soul is different. And the soul is the thing that escaped, and the remaining bit is just like a little bit of investiture.
Yeah, to put on my cosmologically hat, I think that this is going to bring us back to the distinctions between cognitive aspects and cognitive shadows. We've talked about this a lot, so I don't want to do it too much. But basically, remember from Mistborn's Secret History, Kelsier dies, and there is a cognitive aspect of himself that is talking to Fuzz in the immediate aftermath of his death that is fading. And then there's a bunch of other people who are dying in that moment. And we would assume every time somebody dies, there's a little cognitive aspect that fades pretty quickly within minutes. And even Kelsier, who's said to last longer because he was an invested being as a Mistborn, he's still fading really quickly. He has to run to the Well of Ascension. And it's only when he gets there and he is able to tap in to a source of investiture that he is elevated to what we define as a cognitive shadow. And
Yeah, I
so I
think
think that with the heralds, they are elevated to cognitive shadow by the oath pact, by their honor blades. And there's links between all of those things. What the blade does is it breaks the links that exists. And maybe there's another one over to a spiritual aspect or a soul or whatever. But like I think the
Yeah, I
links are
think that's
broken.
where my confusion is. I feel like there's a fourth thing that is starting to be introduced in the Cosmere, whereas for most of the books, most of the sort of lore, it's been pretty clearly broken into three: our physical, cognitive, spiritual realms. And I think originally I was assuming that the spiritual realm was heaven, like was the afterlife, the spiritual place.
Okay.
And then in accordance with that, humans would also have a physical aspect, a cognitive aspect, and a spiritual aspect, the spiritual aspect being the same thing as a soul. And so
Right.
upon death, spiritual aspect goes to the spiritual realm, and that is the afterlife. But we continue to be told that there is also a beyond. And at the time of Secret History, I think I was assuming that beyond was just a different name for spiritual realm.
Oh, okay.
But after Wind and Truth, we see that those are two different things.
Definitely.
The spiritual realm is something else. So then now I'm confused about there being a spiritual aspect of a person and then maybe also a soul. But then, like, what is a soul if not your spiritual aspect?
Yes, and I don't want to just get into this
Yeah.
conversation one more time, but I do think that's what it is pointing us at. And while we are going to remain for a little bit longer on the podcast, Isles of the Emberdark free, we know there's a lot of international listeners who were not benefiting from the early release of Isles of the Emberdark. There are some things in Isles of the Emberdark that could maybe give some clarity to what is going on as well. So keep that in the back of your mind if you happen to be shouting into your headphones of just like, why don't you mention this thing? That's probably why, if it comes from Isles of the Emberdark. But I think that L is aware of these gemstone prisons. He is aware that they function better for something like Ba-Edo Mishram or the Thrill, and it doesn't work on humans as well as thought, or at least not this once upon a time human who is a herald. I find all of that interesting. But then what is probably most surprising is that as L is leaving the vault, he runs into the new Odium and he immediately knows that it's not Raisa. I think he's the first person, because we know Wit fails. I think he's
Yeah.
the first person who interacts with Odium and calls him out immediately and is just like, you're not Odium.
Yeah. To be fair, Teravangian's not explicitly trying to trick him like he is with Hoyd, but yeah, he knows very quickly that this is a different person. Teravodium wants to test L's loyalty, and he asks him to go to the Shattered Plains and to help bring even more fused troops to that battlefield. Elle says that the only way to do this is by Di Gunarthus, who is another unmade, also known as the Black Fisher. And we get some information about this unmade that we have really not seen or heard anything about prior to this. Quote, Di Gunarthus is dangerous to unleash, Odium said.
Despite that, Elle said, if you require an Elskate, she is the sole option, unless you have access to corrupted Else colors or a proper honor blade, end quote. Okay, super interesting there. One, kind of confirmation that the unmade do seemingly reflect some of the surges. More, not normally a blend between surges, but like one surge. And Digonarthus has the ability to create an Elskate. I think that is worthy of more conversation in just a couple of minutes. But I also think that L says, unless you have access to corrupted Else collars, seemingly giving us like indication that Odium can control the corrupted versions of the Radiants. But we know that's not true, that there are quote unquote enlightened, corrupted truth watchers in the form of Renarin and Relaine who do not necessarily work for Odium. I'm wondering if they are vulnerable to Odium, certainly, like a person stabbed with a hemalurgic spike is vulnerable to ruin. But L is seeming to make that like much more clear. And he already knows about the concept of corrupted radiance that we've never seen. Like the only corrupted anything we thought existed was the Truth Watchers in Renarin and Relaine. But he's like, no, not only do I know that corrupted things exist, there's also been corrupted Else Callers, maybe in the past.
Yeah, maybe in the past. I don't know if this is a confirmation that they exist in the present as this is happening, but it is notable that perhaps this has happened previously.
I find that surprising that this has happened before.
Yeah.
Because I thought the enlightenment or the corruption was a new thing that was occurring for the first time. but maybe not.
Yeah, for sure. Elle is also very curious about this request from Terravodium. He sort of sees through the somewhat casual way in which Terravodium is asking Elle to accomplish this task, and he says, quote, "Most of the lands you'd want are still protected from her touch, but Natanatan, perhaps you would need a strong source of investiture on either side," end quote. So Elle is sort of hinting at this idea that in order for Diagon Arthas to work, she's going to need access to a lot of investiture. And he's like, what would that investiture be on the Shattered Plains, Odium? Seems like you have a little secret here.
And we know that eventually, by the end of Wind and Truth, it's going to be Elle's, quote unquote, agreement or acceptance of specifically the listeners. I don't know if I've been mixing that up in the past, but like the listeners are led, in quotes, by Venli, and they're on the Shattered Plains. It's going to be Elle who accepts their claim
Mm.
on
Hmm.
the Shattered Plains, which gives them the massive source of investiture he's hinting at here in the Well of Control. And we talked about how that might be a big problem for Odium, especially with this line. Quote, "Travel to the peaks via Shanaim, and I shall send Diagonarthus to you. Use her particular talents to take the garrison at the peaks and claim the Shattered Plains in my name. I will pay her price another time." End quote. Diagonarthus has a price, and Odium is writing checks that I don't know if he's still able to cash. I don't know if he's going to be able to pay the price that Diagonarthus, now that he does not control his well of control.
Oh, you think he needs to like pay her an investiture or something?
Certainly, wouldn't that be what a being of unmade spren
I have no
proportions was?
idea. I mean, you would pay the thrill in emotion or, like you could pay them in different, I could imagine plenty of different things that
Even if
an
it
unmade
was
would want.
right, even if it was something else, the way that you would get that is by using investiture, in my
Maybe.
mind. And I don't know if
I
Odium is
mean,
limited in ways that we don't currently understand because he does not control his own well.
but he is still a being of essentially infinite investiture, you know?
Yes, I totally agree, and I do understand that, like, yeah, infinite is infinite, but there's also
There's going to be disadvantages, obviously,
I
to
think there
not
are.
having access to his pools. There's going to be disadvantages and risks to the pool being available for potentially another Ba'edo Mishram situation of someone else taking part of his power and then the power sort of being split in this weird way. That doesn't mean that he is not still a shard.
Definitely. I
Yeah.
just think that some infinities are larger than others. And
I
it might
think
be that Odium has been losing sections of his infinity. It's still infinite, but it's maybe not as large as the combined forces of all of the shards that are rising up against him in the great war of the Cosmere.
Yeah, of course. So what we know about Diagon Arthas at this point, which again is the most we've ever learned about her. First, she's a her. Second, even Odium feels that Diagon Arthas is dangerous to activate. We also know that most lands are somehow protected from her. I don't know if I have a clear idea on how precisely they would be protected, but apparently the Shattered Plains, Natanatan, is more susceptible to her for whatever reason. She also seems to just not be able to work on her own. She needs access to big sources of investiture in order to create these Else gates, and she requires a price. So high power, but it also seems high cost.
Yeah, and I actually think that's mimicked with the individual else callers like Yasna.
Yeah.
Their potential is always so great. And I know that, people who are playing the Cosmere RPG or just like long ago, everyone was speculating like, oh, else callers are going to be like the mutant Nightcrawler from X-Men and he's popping here and there and just like zipping. But it's more that there is a very high cost or barrier to these powers of teleportation.
Hmm.
And Diagonarthus seems to follow that same model.
Yeah.
Incredibly high cost or barriers to the actual use of these powers.
Then Terravodium comments on El's characterization of Yezrian as a friend. And remarks that El might have to kill more of his friends, aka the Heralds.
Elle says this, quote, "My friends had their chance. When left on this world, they enslaved my people. The heralds deserve annihilation. It is a mercy." End quote.
El seems very well aligned with Taravangian's worldview. They both have a sense of like honor and morality, right? They both have this idea that I'm actually doing the right thing to kill my friend, Taravangian with Dalinar, and El with the Heralds. This kind of twisted feeling that no, no, really, it's better. It's better if it comes from a friend. It's better if a friend stabs you in the back because it's sort of for the greater good.
Of course. I mean, how many times have we heard this now? The greater good. It is also exactly what was said from the 16 plus Hoyd to make 17 to Ada Nauseam
Mm,
of just like, hey, we're doing this for your benefit. This is a kindness. This is a
right.
mercy.
Yeah. And I think it's fine. Obviously, Elle has a point. The humans did enslave the singers. That's bad. Like, he can say that. He can say, I'm mad at them. I think they deserve to die. But to say it's a mercy, I think is maybe a mischaracterization that makes him feel better or makes him feel right. And that's just not the case.
It also, I think, is just worth noting anytime the word mercy is used, it's very similar to now how I know people have been pointing out mentions of the word retribution in Stormlight Archive now that we have the Shard of Retribution.
I don't know. It's not capitalized.
It's not
Yeah.
capitalized, and neither were other versions of the word
Yeah, but you
retribution.
can't expect Brandon Sanderson to just not use any of the words that he's used for shards anywhere else.
No, no, no. I don't think that it's always going to be an indicator, but this is not a random usage. He is building up to this concept of like, what am I doing? It is a mercy. And I'm very worried about the shard mercy. And so if there are little moments when regular characters on the smaller personal scale are saying like, this is a mercy and it's a questionable use of mercy, I'm like, oh, that might be indicating what Brandon feels is the
Mm,
negative aspects of mercy.
got
Like
it.
what Elle is describing is maybe very in line with what the shard mercy would be in favor of. They're like, yes, this is a mercy. I love that. Keep going. In the same way that preservation liked the Lord Ruler. He was like, oh, yes, he was so great. He preserved. And though at the beginning of preservation and ruins, I don't think preservation ever would have liked the Lord Ruler. By the end, he was just like, yes, yes, preserve. That's all I want. Mercy, too, I think is going to
Mm.
have a kind of corrupted view of, or at least a
I
in
mean, we're
isolation
certainly
view.
seeing that there are pros and cons of everything, that everything can sort of go too far. Everything, yeah, taken in its sort of distilled, isolated form can be dangerous in different ways.
What I found really interesting is Elle's next move. And this is just one of those things where we have to remember that these new shards, be they Zazed on Scadrial or Taravangian on Rashar, are still very, very young compared to the beings that they are operating against. Elle seemingly was a general, has clearly been alive for thousands and thousands of years, and he baits Taravangian. He baits him in this moment where Teravodium attempts to honor Elle by giving him a title, and Elle rejects the offer. And he wants to see how in control Taravangian is of the power of Odium because he knows, because he's been alive for a very long time, he knows there's a distinction between the vessel and the power. And he's playing up that distinction. And then it comes out in like a flash of rage. And I think that's the power reacting rather than Taravangian. And then Taravangian needs to like push it down a little bit.
Yeah, this also brings up one of the most intriguing aspects of L. In a quote we read earlier, he talks about his honor being stripped. He does not have a title despite being an elevated fuse. You know, they all sort of have this Like, what was Rabaniel's? The Lady of Wishes or something. They all have these titles, the Pursuer, etc., except for L. L is the only one that doesn't have a title. He also does not speak to the rhythms, and it's unclear if he's not able to or if he's just sort of been banned from using the rhythms, presumably because of this demotion when his honor was stripped. So he falls into an extremely unique category. Seemingly, he is the only one of the fused in this position. And we don't know anything about this really, but I'm very interested to hear Elle's kind of origin story.
Yeah, because I think there is a very clear and obvious reason why he doesn't speak to the rhythms, why he rejects a title. It's because those things are anchors. They bind him in a way like the pursuer. Once you are the pursuer, if you fail to pursue, that messes with your mind. That destroys the cognitive shadow. Because L is very old, because L is smart, he knows not to tie yourself to all of these anchors and not to be bound by all of these things. I
I mean,
don't
that might be part of it.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's 100% like the only answer that exists, but I think it's exactly what we see going on with Shalash to a degree. It's not the only thing, but she is destroying images of herself to not be bound by the like religious fervor and people praying to her and, kind of creating an icon of her
Mhm.
because she wants to be herself. Like she doesn't want the impact of other people. I think L is doing a similar thing, rejecting any type of naming convention so that he is not bound, which is a limit. He is actually greater by having what everybody else sees as a demotion.
Yeah, maybe. I think that he is certainly, at the very least, making the best of the situation that he's in and sort of secretly find some freedom in being relieved of the typical singer or fused kind of power structures. There is a freedom in existing outside of a paradigm. I don't know if that's necessarily something that he chose in all agency, but he has at least embraced it. In lieu of giving him a new title, Terravodium just elevates L above the Nine, who is the ruling body of the fuse. And he says, now the Nine reports to you, basically. Like, you are the head fused, which the Nine are going to be pissed about because, again, L is in the doghouse in terms of being a fused.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in favor of L. L does everything right in this instance. He's showing what I also agree is a form of mercy to Yezrian's soul or whatever cognitive aspect. He outplays or outthinks the shard of odium, and then at the end of it is elevated above the people who punished him and is still not bound in ways that we know the pursuer is weakened by. He's weakened by that name. He's weakened by that concept of like, I must pursue. L doesn't have any of that. His station has been elevated. And in my mind, he was a little bit of a nice guy with all of this stuff in terms of the mercy aspect, not imprisoning the soul
I
of the herald.
mean, yeah, he has some things to recommend him. I'm hesitant to think of him as a nice guy.
Yeah, we're gonna get to the back half, and he's gonna just be murdering people all across Rashar, and I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna really regret ever saying or hinting that he was nice.
Yeah, I mean, okay, we close with this quote. Quote, "What an enchanting day." In his head, he began to compose a poem to celebrate this new god he was delighted to worship, someone who, he suspected, would know the value of what he had and would let El help humankind finally realize their true passions. End quote. This guy sounds a little bit like an evangelist. Like, he wants to save the souls of humankind. He's super passionate about like bringing the truth to this population because he loves them and he wants to save them and he wants what's best for them. And that can very easily be very bad.
Yeah, you know
You
who
know,
he
like the colonizers also like
thought they were doing
wanted
great.
to
Yeah.
save people's souls and whatnot,
And
and
what can you justify if that's your
yeah,
motivation?
yeah, exactly.
Of course. He actually reminds me a little bit right now of Harathan from
Yeah,
Elantris.
totally, totally.
And obviously, he's a complex character that we didn't
Yeah.
get a lot about. But yeah, there's some similar vibes there in terms of the evangelist, the preacher, the missionary type of thing. And now Odium seems to have a willing missionary to kind of spread and rule over the fused and the singer population.
Yeah, and again, Elle and Taravangian seem to have very similar worldviews. Elle says he's delighted to be in service of this new odium, and that's scary to me.
Yeah, you can't be actually a good person. I take it all back. You can't be a nice person if you're happy serving Odium, who is now Retribution.
Yeah.
So I was wrong, but everybody is very familiar with Tyler being wrong. So that's great. Let's get to your big one, your favorite one. This is Baxil and Axies the Collector.
I think about Baxil at least once a week. Like, if it had made any sense, I probably would have done this as our first Wind and Truth episode.
You suggested it. You were like, could we start with
I
Baxil?
was like, I think we should start with Baxil.
Does that make sense? No, it does not. However, that's the passion that you have for the Baxil interlude. Tell me all about it.
Let me remind everyone, we first meet Baxil all the way back in the Way of Kings interlude. In that interlude, he is working for the mistress, who is Shalash, unbeknownst to Baxil and his friend. Baxil and his companion talk about the old magic, the sort of pros and cons of it. He says that he's considered visiting the Night Watcher to ask for the boon of courage to make himself more useful. He considers himself unlucky, and he thinks he probably wouldn't even be able to find the old magic if he tried. He obviously has a pretty like negative view of himself. He's not a very confident person. And then the interlude ends with Baxil resolving to go out and seek the old magic after all. He says like I'm going to give it a try.
Yeah, but an easy character to forget, especially when there's more interesting interludes in Way of Kings. And I just think of Baxil now as a bookend. We started with a little bit of Baxil interlude. We end Wind and Truth with a little bit of Baxil interlude.
I mean, I think he's going to come back.
Well, that's what I'm saying. How far he came between those two, how far is he going to go in the future? That's what I'm wondering, because in Wind and Truth, completely different.
Completely different.
I mean, is he even a person anymore? Nobody
Who
knows.
knows? We pick up with Baxil in Wind and Truth. He is in Azamir. He's changed quite a lot since we saw him last. We think he has been to the Night Watcher and he's received his boon/curse. I'm wondering if he is another instance of a person who actually saw cultivation, because his condition seems maybe outside the realm of what the Night Watcher could do. He seems to have a condition sort of somewhat similar to Lift, in that he seems to be either partially or maybe
Fully.
all the way
Yeah.
in the cognitive realm. This new Baxil is only visible to people if they are specifically looking for him. So basically invisible. He can only touch people if they are trying to kill him. And every inch of his body, except for his eyes, is wrapped in crimson cloths. It's described a little bit that sometimes the strips of cloth like escape his cloak and are waving around in the wind, which reminded me of a mist cloak a little bit, but red cloths on this invisible person that can't touch anything.
It's such a strange description. It's obviously nothing like we saw him at first. It does have that link to Lift, and I think that's maybe the call out that we should really be focused on, because Lift is a character that is still mainly in the physical world, but has a much stronger connection to the cognitive realm. Baxil might be the inverse of that. A once mortal physical realm person who is now almost entirely cognitive realm with only small connections back to the physical. I want to at least introduce this concept because we know that one of Ishar's experiments was about trying to bring Spren
Yeah.
into the physical world.
Hmm.
It would make sense to me that while Ishar can't do that, the idea comes from somewhere. The
Oh.
concept comes from somewhere. And maybe it is something that the shards are able to play around with a little bit more. Cultivation sees what's going on
Mm.
and is like, I can do something like that. She takes Baxil and like pushes him mainly into the cognitive realm, doing the reverse of what Ishar is trying to do.
Hmm.
That's just fun speculation, but there are more aspects of Baxil that we need to talk about because he enters a tea shop.
He says that the tea shop is known for its discretion and they have instructions to watch for him. And he has an interesting conversation with the bouncer at the front. Quote, Master Crimson, he said, we got your note.
As well you did, Baxil said, or we might not be able to have this conversation. End quote. Right there, he needed to give the note to tell people to be on the lookout for him, to be, and that like unlocked the power or whatever, and he became visible to them
Right.
only because the note existed.
Yes. And seemingly, it's not even just that he's invisible like a ghost and could sort of walk up and like talk to or whisper to someone, even if they couldn't see him. It's that if they don't know he exists, they can't perceive him at all. Because he says we wouldn't even be able to have this conversation. So it's not even that he could have walked up, started talking, and then they would have been like, oh, Mr. Baxil must be here. No, they have to know about him in order to perceive him in any way. And he has this title of Master Crimson.
Yeah, that title is also, it's just something I'm taking note of. It's like it's an
Exactly.
interesting one, and I don't quite.
Like, what is up with the red? Why red? Why
Red
strips of
jumps out to me. Yeah,
cloth?
red jumps out to me. I'm just like,
I don't
what's
know.
going on? Are you corrupted? Are you autonomy? What is happening? I need to know. I would love the concept of this is way too much speculation, but I would love the concept of other shards like seeing what was happening on Scadrial, knowing about Mistcloaks, and being like, dang, I want that. I want my own version of that. It's so cool. And so, a cultivation or an autonomy or someone like wraps Baxel up and creates Master Crimson and to get that cool vibe of like Mistcloaks, but
Right.
right color.
Yeah, okay.
Completely ridiculous, I know. But importantly, Baxel gives a tip to the bouncer and says, quote, a few spheres which became real as he dropped them. So he is able to like hold something real in his status of not corporeal. Is that the word? When you're not a ghost?
Uh, yeah, I mean,
And then when
seemingly,
he drops them, they become real.
right. So, like, is he manifesting them out of nothing? I don't know. The fact that they are becoming real as he drops them says that they weren't real prior to that, but like, I don't know what that means.
I think there's a little bit of quantum superposition going on here. Baxel is a particle and a wave simultaneously, and he cannot be observed, and therefore he never solidifies until someone
Hmm.
knows to look at
Okay.
him specifically.
Yeah.
When he drops the spheres, they go from being in quantum superposition to fully forming as particles in the real world because he's not interacting with them
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah, yeah.
And so then they go back to their status as like physical particles and they
I
become real.
actually don't hate this. This is a dumb theory, but I don't hate
We've done
it.
it, people. We have done it.
Baxel is the flame spren from the
Yes.
Jaranid
Wow.
interlude.
This actually, yeah, okay. See, I like this more and more because we see those flame spren, obviously, spren, mainly cognitive. But Baxel is again like the inverse. He started out as physical, now he's mainly cognitive and can drop back in. It's all there. It's all happening, people.
Then Baxel goes into the tea shop proper and he's meeting someone. The person that he is meeting is Axies. Axies the Collector, who we also first met in The Way of Kings in an interlude. As a reminder, Axies is a Sia Amian who travels around collecting sightings of rare spren. In this, Interlude, he is searching for a specific spren that's mentioned in a report from 150 years ago that appears when men hit their fingers with a hammer on accident. He says that this spren is most likely a joke, but he persists in attempting to make this spren appear. He has a unique title for Baxil. He calls him Crimson Memory. Don't know what that means.
Well, that one strikes me as more important than Master Crimson. Crimson Memory has some sleepless
What
vibes.
does that mean?
Some like ancient Cosmere things that I feel like, you're connected to something greater than yourself, the memory of XYZ.
I
I
don't
don't know.
know. I don't know. And then we do hear that Axies says that Axies has been alive for millennia, which tracks with what we know of Amiens and Sleepless, but this is the first time we've heard him specifically reference that. And then there's a very interesting interaction. It's kind of a long quote, but I think it's worth it. Quote, Baxel sighed, but did as expected. He held his hand out over the tea, feeling the heat of the steam, and imagined. People throughout the tea house enjoyed their drinks, especially the stark black Jeremon tea, as they'd provided for him. Bitter, sharp, like drinking the venom of something aggressive. This was tea that fought back. Such things had a life of sorts, not the individual cups so much as the concept of tea. With this many people thinking about it, savoring it, complaining about it, Baxel could taste it and remember what it had been like to drink during a time that seemed so distant yet so familiar all at once, before his blessing and before his curse. Today, a great number of people thinking about the same thing let him feel the bitter tea on his tongue as he sat with his hand over the cup. You're sure you're not a spren? Axies asked. I'm putting you in the appendix regardless, you realize. End quote.
Certainly one of the more important quotes from this interlude. And I think it brings us back to this concept of concepts. The idea that Brandon has introduced and is, widespread across the Cosmere about the thoughts of things. When people have thoughts and they have developed those thoughts over time, it begins to take shape. It begins to manifest. You do that enough on Rashar, you create Spren.
I think we are starting to learn that it does need to be a group of people, a society, kind of a collective concept. If one person is thinking about tea, I don't think that really does anything. It's
Unless
like
that one person is invested enough. I just want to bring that caveat in. But
maybe.
yeah, I think that you're totally correct when it comes to the general principle. It's about groups of people. But I'm not 100% certain if a dragon couldn't think about something hard enough and then make spren from it. But we will leave that conversation for another day. In this moment, what Baxil is kind of tapping into, in my mind, are the cognitive realm thoughts, emotions, and feelings regarding the tea, because that's all that he can tap into. He cannot take something from the physical realm, seemingly. Maybe spheres is a caveat because there's like investiture and like he's mainly holding on to that investiture, but like the physical tea, he cannot pick that up and drink it.
Seemingly, no.
And so what he does instead is he like taps into the not quite a spren, but like the budding spren network of tea and starts to vibe off of everybody's feelings about tea.
Yeah, he's just kind of channeling other people's feelings and thoughts about the tea, and that is sort of giving him an experience maybe similar to tasting the tea.
I mean, it's definitely not the same as tasting the tea. He remarks upon that later, but it is the best he can do.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, it's bringing us back to this Sandersonian idea about like the concept of concepts. And what does it mean when a group of people believe in a story or define characteristics like honor or so on and so forth? You could just like keep breaking this down. And I think here we have a being who is mainly cognitive realm and they are interacting with something physical via the cognitive realm aspects of that thing.
Yeah. Axies asks the question that we're all thinking, are you a spren? And Baxel thinks to himself that he's not a spren, but he does think that Spren find him fascinating. So there's somewhat of an answer for us. He's not quite a Spren. Spren think he's very interesting. And then Baxil asks if Axies brought his bandages. Quote, red wraps prepared in the most special of ways as Baxil needed. The key to his survival, end quote.
This is wild to me.
What?
Yeah. Okay, so the
What?
bandages are prepared in a special way. There's something
And they have to
special
be
is done,
red.
and they're the key to his survival.
Like what?
They're holding him together. I think he would disperse out from his physical form, and he doesn't have enough whatever mass. He doesn't have enough gravity
That he'll
to
just
hold
like
him.
stop existing?
He'll like fade into the cognitive realm, and the wraps maintain that. They like he's not a misspren, right? But misspren are said to kind of like mainly be elusive and kind of like flowing from one state to the other. The more that they bond with a radiant, the more person-like they become.
Well, that's true of all Spren.
I agree.
In the cognitive realm, mist Spren are in the shape of people. They're just made out of mist.
They're in the shape of people, but they are less people-like than honor spren. They like honor spren by the default that exists in the cognitive realm are more solid appearing, and I think that's true of a lot of spren. Mist spren are closer to being mist than they are to being people, even when they are in the cognitive realm. The concept that we have here with Baxil is maybe similar, is that he is something, and this is coming from our next little quote, but he's something that's kind of like about to be blown away in a breeze. We have this quote, Axies would stay, of course, hunting the rare spren of enraged passions during war. Well, the Amian had proven resilient, while Baxil himself always felt he was one calm breeze away from dissipating, like smoke from a dead fire, end quote.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious if that is literal or more metaphorical.
Yeah, obviously it could be one, it could swing to one side of the metaphorical or the literal, but I happen to believe it's far more literal, and that the bandages, the wraps, are literally like keeping him from being blown away.
And they have to be, they're like invested in a special way or something.
Heck, they might be infused with aluminum. They might be.
I was thinking maybe they're awakened cloths.
They could be awakened, because we know that you cannot pass through easily invested objects. And so
If like, yeah, if there's cloth that they've gotten
a bunch
an
of breath
awakener
dump
to
in.
give a command of like, be Baxil's body or something, which is the why they have to be like, quote, prepared in the most special of ways. Maybe why he can like only get them from Axies who might know other world hoppers. Okay, I like this theory.
It's a crazy theory, and we definitely want to hear your opinions on what Baxil is and, you know, how all of this is operating.
And what, okay. In Way of Kings, he says, I am going to go seek the old magic and I'm going to ask for courage. If that is what he ended up asking for, why would this be what he gets? And he says specifically he has a blessing and a curse. So I think he does go to seek the old magic. Again, I don't know if he saw the Night Watcher or if he saw cultivation, but then like what possible interpretation of courage is like what happened to Baxil?
Maybe courage is the thing that he needs to continue on. Like if he didn't have courage, he would just fall apart. There is, you know, something that is just like he has to keep his mind in a certain way to like ground himself, or he floats away, just like smoke after the fire.
Yeah. I don't know, but I'm open to all ideas.
To me, there's one other call out that I want to make, because there's a creature or a being in the Cosmere that is a little bit ghost-like, and that's the Shades from Threnody. Shades from Threnody, of Sunlit Man as well, are said to be non-corporeal, that they can move through walls or objects. Now, the Shades are limited by silver. Tyler has lots of speculation about why that is, but I think that that's the other creature in the Cosmere that maybe Baxil is kind of like. And
Hmm.
shades don't need to be like held together or they
Right.
fall apart. So that
Yeah.
doesn't line up. But if it was a different shard's creation of a being like a shade, so it's maybe cultivation's version
I
of a
mean,
shade.
but I think shades are accidents basically because of what happened on
I don't think it's
Threnody.
done purposefully. You're
Yeah.
100% correct. But if it's accidental, then that means that all it takes is a series of mechanisms to trigger in the right
Yeah.
order, and you get the outcome of shade. And if
I
that's true,
mean,
then a designer could definitely copy it and make their own thing following a similar path.
I like the idea that cultivation has put her eggs into more baskets. You know, we've talked a lot about these three people that we have confirmed that cultivation interacted with Teravangian, Lift, and Dalinar as a play to perhaps replace all of the vessels of the shards on Rashar. But I like the idea that she has looked around a little bit and been like, this didn't quite work out the way that I expected or the way that I wanted to, in particular with Teravangian. I think at this point, she's kind of realized, like, you had the potential to do this well, and you're not going down the good path. So I think it's just a fun thing to keep in mind that there may be other people like Baxil walking around with cultivation given situations.
Yeah, I definitely think that cultivation gave more than we've seen on screen. Baxil may be an example. I think you and I talked about the physical change that she left Rashar with before
Oh, of
she
course.
left with a
Yeah.
draining of the Pure Lake, but that ends up surrounding the country of
Yeah.
Azamir.
Yeah.
And that it kind of like stuck in my brain as like, oh yeah, she's still working in certain ways, she's still doing certain things that are going to have long-term consequences because she is particularly good at knowing and understanding the long-term consequences of these actions.
Yeah.
And so I definitely agree with you there. Could be more characters that were touched by cultivation. I'm not opposed to this being a growth or development of the Night Watcher, though I
Oh.
just because the Night Watcher we've seen the least of, we've never heard anyone who's actually bonded the Night Watcher to make the
Yeah.
third bondsmith. But we've also been told like there can never be more than 3 bondsmiths.
Yeah.
But in reality, from what we know, there's never more than 2 bondsmiths because nobody's ever bonded the Night Watcher. So like unless someone did and they knew about the third one, I just feel like
Yeah.
there had to be an example where someone was like, okay, 1, 2, 3. But so far, all we have are examples
Yeah.
of 1 and 2. And so, I'm not opposed to more development of the Night Watcher like the sibling and to kind of like see what would happen with the Night Watcher. I do believe that because cultivation is gone, the Night Watcher is free in a sense. Whereas previously they were like held in the valley.
Yeah.
And now I'm just like, okay, well, what if the Night Watcher is going to go out and, find their radiant type
Eh.
of thing?
I mean, I think the Night Watcher is going to be similar to the sibling or the Stormfather. Like, the Stormfather was hanging out in the storms, the sibling was just hanging out in the tower. I think the Night Watcher is probably just going to hang out in the forest and like wait for the right people to come.
Totally possible, but they could also hang out in the night. And there is far more night on the planet of Rashar now
Well,
and
isn't
darkness.
that one of the other forces like the wind?
Yes. Yes,
So
it
the
is.
Night Watcher is not the night, we should
Correct.
note. Like
Yes,
those
yes,
are two
correct.
different entities. The
I
night is the night.
The night is the night, but I think the night and the Night Watcher,
I mean, they might be friends.
they might be friends.
Yeah.
Anyways, so much speculation.
But the last important thing, because we end with Baxil leaving the tea shop, and he says he's going to continue, quote, on his quest, hoping that someday he might be able to enjoy the simple pleasure of sipping tea again, end quote. So it sounds to me like the quest that he's on is like trying to become corporal again,
Maybe.
perhaps.
I mean, he might be on a different quest and then he has a hope that someday he might be able to, like, that might not be his quest.
Maybe.
But I do think
But
that
he has a quest.
the quest might also take courage. Like that
Yeah.
is the thing that he needs courage, and to have courage you need to be challenged in a very specific way. So now he is challenged because he's a ghost or whatever.
Hmm.
And he needs to go on a quest which will require courage. And by the end of that quest, nobody has given him courage. He has earned the courage himself, which is the only way to
Hmm.
have courage.
I don't know. I feel like that's very surreptitious in terms of trying to get courage to like fit into this condition.
Well, I am trying
I
definitely
know.
to make that connection back to Way of Kings, but I love seeing the bookend of Axies and
Yeah.
Baxil from Way of Kings, now in Wind and Truth. Certainly think that's going to be a setup for the back half. I don't think this is the last we see of Baxil.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was so satisfying in Wind and Truth to see so many repeat
Definitely.
interlude characters, specifically from Way of Kings. It was really satisfying to see a lot of plot points and characters that were brought up, particularly in the interludes, come back in new interludes and give more information, kind of reconnect with those characters. It was one of the things I really enjoyed about this book.
I completely agree. And I think it's one of the easiest things to overlook because obviously, if you only read
I mean,
Way
there's
of
so
Kings by
many.
yourself 10 years ago, and then you read Wind and Truth, how could you nobody else is doing what you and I are doing,
Yeah.
obsessively rereading and taking notes and all that stuff. So that's why we love making these episodes. That's why it's so great to have listeners along for the ride, letting us know their different thoughts and opinions. Please continue to do so. Give us a shout out on your podcast listening service of your choosing. Rate and review 5 stars, all that jazz.
And until next time, life before death,
Strength before weakness.
journey before destination.